Hey, it's Rob Ryan. I'm back. Another episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers. I just had an incredible conversation with my friend Miki Reynolds from the cutting edge, trailblazing, culturally leading venture capital firm here in Los Angeles called Slauson Co. They got some big announcements happening recently, really doubling down on their leadership in the industry and creating community connection. If you are a founder, if you're an investor, if you're a limited partner investor, institutional investor who invests in young up and coming funds, what the team at Slauson Co is doing is incredible. And more importantly, what my friend Miki Reynolds, who's been a leader here in the entrepreneurial economy of Los Angeles for now probably 10 years, her insights that she shares about the state of the entrepreneurial economy in LA, the state of the underrepresented, underserved entrepreneurial economies around the United States, and just her general views of kind of where we're at in our evolution of entrepreneurship and building entrepreneurial opportunity for more people here in Los Angeles and nationwide. She drops all that wisdom, shares all that energy and positivity with her normally pragmatic, optimistic approach to life. And it was a true pleasure. I hope you all enjoy the episode as much as we did making it for you. Hola, hello, bienvenido, and welcome back or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers, the show where I get the pleasure of having weekly conversations with the brightest, most interesting entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of our society today, as we try together to kind of figure out how to leave this world a little bit better than we found it. So today, super excited to have a repeat guest, her second visit to the show, our really good friend, Miki Reynolds, who's currently the head of programs at Slauson Co here in Los Angeles. But before we dive into all that, let me refresh you a little bit on Miki and her background. And then we'll dive into all kinds of things that we want to talk about today in the state of the world in September of 2024. So the last time Miki visited with us was back in the summer of 2022. And at the time, she was leading one of the seminal entrepreneurial organizations here in Los Angeles called Grid 110. We spoke extensively about that program, about the roots of the LA entrepreneurial economy, and about Miki's key leadership locally and kind of in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic. But here we are today, 2 years since that conversation, and 2 years sometimes seems like 20 years lately. And that was really what spurred me to reach out to Miki and say, like, I think it's time for us to have a conversation again. Because it's also like about 10 years, roughly, I think, since Miki began leading here inside the entrepreneurial world of Los Angeles. And I thought with all that's going on and changed in the world just even over the last 6 months or the last year or the last 2 years alone, that it was more than enough time for us to have a conversation. So today, as the head of programs at Slauson Co, which she's going to tell us all about, that just had some big exciting news yesterday, an organization that I think truly is a trailblazer in the industry of venture capital and within the communities that they serve and invest in far beyond Los Angeles. She continues her same advocacy for underrepresented founders and investors, and she now really, as she always has done, drives programs and communities that push the boundaries of economic inclusion towards this better world that we all so desperately need. So it's my pleasure to say, welcome, Miki. It's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me back, Rob.
It's awesome. How are you today? Having a good day, other than it's really oppressively hot here in Los Angeles?
I was looking at the weather forecast for this week. It's supposed to hit 100 for the next 4 days straight.
Yeah, no, it's even. You'll laugh at this. I said to my team, both of whom live outside the U.S., therefore they don't operate in Fahrenheit, they operate in Celsius. And so I said to them, here's the temperatures for this week, and they both responded back like, what is that? And so then I was like, okay, let me change my weather setting to Celsius. And then I sent them those, and it's even hot in Celsius, like 40, 41. Yeah. I'm like, that's not a good number in Celsius. So yeah, it's definitely summer. We trade May, right? We trade May and June for September and October here in Los Angeles every year. So.
Even it feels like even more so this year. It feels like most of the year was June gloom, and then we didn't really get a summer started until maybe a month ago.
No, truly. And the part that you highlight, right, is, and I said this morning to a friend, is 25 years ago, okay, it's hot for September and early October, but hot meant 80 to 85. Mm-hmm. Right now, hot means 100 to 104. So clearly, we've broken the climate, which I'm going to talk about on another episode later today with someone who's expert in that. But before we do that, let's jump in and this framework that I talked about, right? So I'm hopeful that you can help shed and share your perspective on just kind of how things going. So first question first, in your humble opinion, what's the state of the entrepreneurial economy in LA, but maybe even at large today in September 2024?
Yeah, great question. I mean, especially coming off this weekend, I'm sure you saw the buzz on Twitter about founder mode and, this mentality that founders need to have. And very divisive. I think lots of people have lots of opinions around it. I think we're in a really interesting space. I think it's been difficult the past few years for specifically founders to raise capital. It's been difficult for venture funds to raise capital. I think coming off the heels of 2021, kind of the bubble bursting when it comes to these enormously probably over valuations of companies, and the market having to correct itself, what the economy was going through post-pandemic. So lots of factors to consider, and just being now on the venture side of the table and looking at what founders are going through and even just our own decision-making processes, it's gotten so much harder for founders to raise capital. The benchmarks, the goalposts keep moving, and to what could have been, pre-product, but like lots of potential and a great team, like you're still getting told too early, come back to us in a couple of months when you have some traction, when you have something built. So it just feels like, it gets more and more difficult. The incline gets steeper for founders. And then in particular, those that, aren't coming from well-resourced areas, don't have the connections, and trying to figure out how to navigate all of this, without maybe mentorship or guidance or anything like that.
Right.
So I think in LA, it's really been interesting to watch how the ecosystem has evolved post-pandemic. I think we were in such a flourishing place pre-pandemic, community buzzing, hotspots all across the city, in terms of just developing and like micro ecosystems, whether it was in Glendale or Pasadena or anywhere. Downtown was where I've spent a lot of time in, and then that all kind of just shattered in the pandemic, and with small businesses suffering and a transition for mayors, and just a lot I think has happened. But I feel like we're coming out on the other side. I know the Tech Week LA schedule just got dropped yesterday, and there's hundreds of events happening across the city, a lot of excitement around it. So I think as we've seen, large venture firms move in, A16Z now has, I think it's like a 50-person office here in Santa Monica. People are from these tier one firms are having locations here, starting to see more buzz around just what LA has to offer. I think we're in a good place. I think we're kind of resuming that like upswing of what we were seeing before. But still a lot of work to do when it comes to who is getting capital, how capital is getting allocated, and how we could be better at that.
Yeah, that you teased it already. That was because you're so smart. This is the next question I wanted to ask, right? So let's drill that down a little bit further. Not just because it's the work at Slauson, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but just because it's what you and I are both hyper conscious of, and it's what frankly you've been just such an advocate and leader for a decade plus. But so more specifically inside of that's the state of kind of the general entrepreneurial economy of Los Angeles and kind of more broadly. What's the entrepreneurial economy like today for the founders of color, for women founders, for those in the LGBTQIA plus communities? Because it was hard for them. It has been hard historically. It was hard for them during the frothy, like exuberant moments. What's it like today from on the ground where you sit?
Yeah, I will say on maybe the opportunity side or like the plus side, I think there are more support organizations, initiatives, funds that are specifically declaring that we are looking for founders of color, underrepresented founders, whatever the definition or however they might define that. So I think,
that's good news.
Yeah. Versus 5 years ago, there weren't as many. I mean, I think when we started Grid 110, almost 10 years ago now, and that became a natural evolution of the types of founders that we were supporting, which happened to be mostly women and people of color, because that's what the city of Los Angeles looks like. But I think now there's so many more programs and organizations, grant opportunities. And granted, they're not always recurring year after year. Some of that funding dries up, but I think
Sure.
that there are more people that are trying to do something about this to create more representation of what the world looks like. So, I mean, just looking at what Black VC has done over the last probably less than 5 years, and the different programs that they have of helping people break into venture, helping people like operators understand what angel investing could look like, whether it's like fellows and getting them placed in internships. The folks over at the La Familia group with Familia BC and Founder Familia, like just more things of happening and galvanizing support and launching programs that are very much needed and getting the support that they need. So that I think on the plus side is like things that didn't exist, say 5 years ago, there are more of those now. But
That's great.
despite that, there are
Yeah. Okay.
still, we still see the reports and the numbers and the statistics of the less than, 2%, 1%, 0.5%
Yeah.
of funding going to women and people of color. So it's not for a lack of them not starting businesses. They definitely are. And I see that's the majority of kind of the deal flow that we see, just from, we invest in through a very inclusive lens. And so we're not
Right.
just looking for women and people of color, but I think because of the representation of our firm, because of our values and what we believe in, we tend to attract very like-minded, like values people. So
Sure.
I think there's still a ton of work. Again, like, we said, like the job's not finished. Like we raised our second
Yeah.
fund, but there is still so much work to do.
It's first of all really encouraging, right? That because I was curious. I've been a little like kind of out of the loop a bit for say 6 to 9 months, kind of focused on some transitional stuff. So I haven't been paying attention to all the statistics as often. So I'm encouraged to hear you say that like kind of the gross volume of programs or leadership or organizations or funds, et cetera, is higher. Like in general, that's
Mm-hmm.
really good to hear. We're not, as you say, we're still not seeing that necessarily like pull along with the capital flowing through to people. Is part of this reality just that this is like a multi-decade kind of generational thing that got created and now it's going to be a multi-decade generational thing to unwind it and do it better? Is that just part of the reality?
I think that is one. I mean, I think when you have people starting at different points and maybe starting further back because of systemically, what has happened historically and what people have had access to and the barriers that have been kind of structurally put in place to just more hurdles and hoops to jump through versus somebody else having a, flat path ahead. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that is part of it. It's going to take time. And even though there's been an increase in resources, allocation of funding, more funds that are very kind of similar in nature, more impact funds. I think again, it will take time. But I think also just seeing, again, sitting on the other side, being on the founder side for so long and supporting entrepreneurs and founders, building a variety of different types of businesses, to now sitting on the venture side and looking through companies at a much more discerning lens. And, just,
Okay.
I hate the fact that our job is to say no, because that's just the
Right.
reality of we have so much money that we can allocate to companies, and we have to be, very selective in terms of, do we think that this company has everything that they need from the team, from the opportunity, from the vision, and seeing so many people and just kind of like getting excited about some and having more conviction in some than others. So even if it's a no for that company, it's a no from us, or maybe it's a no right
Right.
now, doesn't mean that it's a no for everybody, and somebody else, may be better suited to support.
Sure.
So I think it's just,
which is like a nuance
yeah,
that often gets lost, right? Like and let's from the founder side of the table, like that nuance is often lost on them,
yeah,
or they're not, or the first time founder isn't educated to understand and
exactly.
appreciate that nuance,
Yep.
right? So they're taking the no as like oh my god, I'm a failure, this is a terrible idea because this one firm said no,
Yep.
or these 10 firms said no. And the truth is, it's more about like no, you're not good for us,
Yeah.
like for what our mission is. and
Yep.
and I think a lot of early founders then get like super discouraged, or they misinterpret that market feedback.
Yeah, and I think the first time founder kind of educational gap is huge because this is why second time founders and founders that are coming from, the kind of historically funded pedigrees and backgrounds, because they understand, kind of the rules to the venture capital game, how to play it, what you need to have in place. Whereas first time founders, a lot of times, which I love about them, is they're so focused on the problem that they want to solve, and they see an opportunity, but they don't know like all the pieces that you need to put together in order to really make it a compelling opportunity to receive venture capital.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we try to do through a lot of our programs is, we feel like you are the person to do this. You got the right background in terms of your lived experience in the space that you are trying to build in. But here are some gaps that you might have. You might not have the right a technical person on your team. So you've got the vision. We're
Sure.
excited about you as a leader, but like from an execution standpoint, do we feel like you can do that? And that's a risk that you have to take in terms of when you fund that company, of have they identified that talent? Have they worked together? Or is there a hope that you invest in them and then they will go find that talent? And so from our
Yeah.
side of it, it's how do we mitigate that risk? And so even further, where I talk to founders in our programs is here are all the ways that like an investor might say no, and how can you have an answer for that or a solution for it, or try to mitigate that no.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, and that's from my point of view. For decades, I just always thought that where we were broke, I mean, we're broken in the system, quote unquote, in a number of different ways. But where I always thought like we were most damagingly broken was that upfront education gap,
Mm-hmm.
right? That trying to get people to understand, and then just the miscast. It's like this huge net, right? And to use like a bad fishing analogy, it's lots of people who shouldn't be in that net like get caught in that net, and
Mm-hmm.
then they get all disillusioned and frustrated and bothered and give up on themselves in some ways. And you're like, dude, you should have never been in that net. Like you should be building your business over here, and I'm
Yep.
sorry that no one told you that, right, along the way. So the more we can do to that, that's the best. I want to veer off directionally for a second because I wanted us to talk about Slauson, and we're going to, but I want to pull on this a little bit since you've already gone deeper. So I was talking to our friend Kiana Patterson the other day, which is always an enjoyable conversation about anything, including like her hot yoga stuff and all this. I teased her last night. I was like, I'm outside walking right now at 6 o'clock. This is my hot yoga. I was like, I don't need to go to a studio to do this. She's like, you're nuts. Like, I wouldn't even go outside walk right now. But we were talking about that Pledge LA statement that they made. I think it was the summer of 2023, where they wanted to get 50 and 5. And it was this idea of like 50% of LA's invested venture capital on an annualized basis would go to women and founders of color, right? And it would be at like 5 years. And at the time, I thought that was like a crazy statement to make. But then again, moonshots are moonshots, and that's why you talk like that. But in this context of what you and I are talking about right now, like I want to ask you kind of a version of that, right? Is is it just ridiculous? Like, is it unrealistic to talk about going from 1 or 2%, 3%, 0.5% across these different metrics that we talked about for the different kind of demographic cohorts to something like that, 50% in 5 years? Or what we really are talking about is like, hey, over the next 10 years, like, how can we push to get that 2% number to 6%, or how can we get the 0.5% to 4%? Like, is that how we should be thinking? And then like I would ask you, like, what are your ideas? Like, how do we do some of these things? How do we advance some of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was really excited when that kind of campaign came together, because I think every time a report comes out of, the percentage of funding, everybody kind of balks online about it. It's like, oh, again, like we dropped 0.5%, we're not getting any better. And so there's a lot of talk about it, but like, what are we actually doing about it?
Right.
And what can we do that is actionable? And so what I really appreciated about that campaign was drawing a line in the sand and saying that like we're done talking about how absurd these numbers are, and we want to set a very lofty goal that it seems lofty, right? It's very ambitious, but I think it actually really coincides with kind of like a tenet at Slauson, which is like we want founders that are delusional in their vision.
Right.
but pragmatic in their execution. So we want you to
There you
be
go.
incredibly ambitious. You talked about moonshots, like shooting for something that is higher. And so what I appreciate was this is an incredibly ambitious goal.
Yeah.
And it makes a statement that like, this is something that we care about. And it's something to move towards, versus just moving away from something.
Right.
And how we will measure it, where we will stand like year by year, I think will be interesting. Who cares about it will also be very telling, I think, in particular with California.
I still care. I'm still asking about it a year later. Like, hey, is anybody still talking about that? Like,
yeah. And I think some really crucial things have happened. So I think most recently, there was a bill that was signed in the state of California that requires venture capital firms to report kind of the demographics on their investments. So that's firms that are based here, firms that have made investments into companies that are here. This is something that Los Angeles was already doing through Pledge LA anyway, and started, 3 or so years ago. And so we already had somewhat of a benchmark. And so we already had some data that we were trending higher on average than the rest of the country.
I was going to say that was one of the things that got my attention that summer when that announcement was made, was because then I started asking, like, well, wait, like, where are we at?
Yeah.
Right. And then that was both surprising, but now, like, as the guy with the megaphone, I'm like, wait a minute. So it turns out, right, and I'll use generic numbers, but where one demographic gets 1 or 2% in LA, they get 4 or 5%. Mm-hmm. In where one demographic gets 0.5% in LA, they get 3%. Yeah. And so I was like, wait, we're like 5 to 10 times or 6 times, 8 times better than the rest of the country. So, and no one's talking about that, like as one of our differentiators. Like, hey, you're a diverse founder. Guess what? We have the math to show you that you literally have a greater opportunity, although still an embarrassingly low opportunity. Yes. But like, you have a better opportunity to come here. So I, like, to your point, like the pragmatism of delusional goals. Mm-hmm. We have some real data that tells us what we're building upon.
Yep. Yeah.
How do we do the pragmatic part? Yes. Right.
Yeah. So I think that will be kind of the telling piece is we've made this statement and declared this goal. And so what are the initiatives that will fall in line? So outside of the measurements and the benchmarking, it's kind of, holding people accountable, the firms that signed on to be, to the pledge, the original pledge for Pledge LA, which was to contribute to this, community, to benchmark where they're at, the programs that have come out of that have been the Pledge LA Founders Fund to help, more diverse founders, just accelerate their growth. They've done the VC Fellowship, which has gotten, so many more first-time college students, underrepresented across all the different categories, jobs, and, their foothold into venture, which I think has been really exciting. And that helps, diversify the decision makers when it comes to writing checks and funding, and the communities and the founder networks that they have access to that can kind of bring into their deal flow for consideration. So I think there have been some meaningful things that Pledge LA has done. And I'll be curious to see, who else steps up to contribute to this. If we see things from the mayor's office, wanting to support this. I know Garcetti in his previous administration was one of the kind of original founding partners for Grid 110. And so I'm very curious to see what Mayor Bass does now that kind of pandemic stuff has been taken care of, and homelessness, while still very far from being resolved,
it's in progress. Yeah, it's in progress. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I know that was a major priority for her coming into office, but I'm very curious from like the small business, economic development, and startup support kind of world, like what that will look like.
That's fascinating. And also, I happened to catch when I got home last night, I flipped on the news and caught that apparently we also might have a presidential candidate who's super excited about entrepreneurial small business and creating a more opportune economy for all, and stimulating. I don't think I can remember the last time I heard someone speak it from a presidential podium about venture capital and being diversified outside the main cities and getting in the hands of more different looking people. I was like, oh, maybe we should elect this woman. I don't know. That sounds like maybe a good idea.
I know. I think she actually used the word founders. Like, she talked about small businesses, entrepreneurs, and then said the word founder. And people were like, wait.
And I was like, founders, venture capital. I was like, this is okay. This is the next president potentially. So that's awesome.
Yep.
No, it's, and I'm with you. I think those things combine. Um, yeah, and just like everything else in Los Angeles right now, which is like catalyzed by a singular focus on this Olympic event in
Mm-hmm.
2028. Maybe creative people in your industry will find ways to tie these measurements and tie this venture investment into like, hey, if we could do this by the Olympics, and if we could tie it to the Olympics, that'd be great. So, okay, all right, so big announcement yesterday at your current firm, Slauson Co. I just want you, for anybody that's listening that doesn't know, this is your chance to give us the commercial. Tell us what is Slauson Co. Tell us all about it, and what I'm really interested in, tell us why Slauson as an organization is so important in today's economy.
Yeah. Oh gosh, where to start?
Yeah,
So
you can take this any way you want to, and I've got follow ups, so don't
yeah,
worry
I'm
about it.
sure. So Slauson Co is an early stage venture capital firm really rooted in the idea of economic inclusion. So we really believe that investing in a wider array of people that have traditionally, been invested in will create more opportunities for more people. We published this Medium article yesterday. It kind of talked about how a lot of investors are fishing out of the same pond. So they are, looking at key cities, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, New York, or key entities, Y Combinator, for kind of the future of innovation and what is exciting and what's going to be $1 billion idea and opportunity. But they're all looking at the same deals and kind of sharing things across the same similar networks in terms of like homogenous networks of people that they know, whether they went to Stanford, Harvard, come from an investment banking background, went to, got their MBA, and are living in these regions. So that's kind of where the primary ponds are that are being fished from. It's really hard to kind of dip into that pond if you're not coming, from it. There's just so much activity and
Right.
kind of chaos that you could easily
Like,
drown.
hey, I lived in that pond
Yeah.
on the other side of the farm,
Yeah.
but we don't like we're not allowed to swim in your pond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so our thesis really is around, we think that there's a much larger body of water, a freaking ocean, of opportunities that people are just not paying attention to. They're overlooking. And these are problems that are being solved by the future of our country, of where
Yeah.
we are going in terms of trending, demographics, the needs that we will have, the changes in society, and people with very close lived experiences to these problems, kind of identifying a problem and opportunity, and wanting to create a solution for it. And so I think the diversity of backgrounds is really important for the future of innovation.
Hugely so. No, using both the pond and the lived experience phrase that you just used, I'm gonna bring it around because I think this is a cool story. So we have lots of folks, investors, entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial thinkers, leaders that aren't here in LA like you and I are, right? And so they're assuming right now that this is a firm named after some guy named Slauson. And that because that's what rich people do when they
Yeah.
start their funds. They put all their 16 letters of their names and they put capitals and they put numbers and they try and impress us with that. It's not, though. And actually, the Slauson, and I would love for you to tell that story as any way you'd like, but Slauson is essentially the pond.
Yeah.
And Slauson is something here in Los Angeles. So why don't you tell us what it is?
Yeah, so the firm Slauson and Co is named after a primary thoroughfare, a street in Los Angeles that spans many, many miles, across the city, across the entire county. And it's called Slauson. And our office is actually on Slauson as well. Our two GPs, Austin and AJ, grew up right off of Slauson, grew up in the neighborhood, they, knew each other from high school. They've known each other for 20 years. And so it's deeply meaningful to them in terms of the name. But I think from a larger kind of like visionary perspective is that, for those that aren't familiar with Slauson, it, starts in like the most industrial part of like LA County,
Right.
and travels through low income neighborhoods, very diverse neighborhoods, and kind of ends at the highest concentration of Black wealth in the country, in
Yeah.
terms of kind of the area a little bit west east of where our office is. So like the Baldwin Hills area, Windsor
Yeah.
Hills. And it's, it's very representative of the founders that we have supported and want to support are, people that live on Slauson. And we feel like that there is a Slauson in every city in the country, and that people are just not paying attention to. A lot of the activity in Los Angeles, or the community and the ecosystem for a very long time has kind of been buzzing around Santa Monica, Venice, that area. It's where a lot of the events are, firms
Yeah.
are, a lot of the activity. But you and I know that there are innovators everywhere across the city.
Everywhere.
And I think in particular,
And to your point, in every city.
yes, absolutely.
There is a Slauson Avenue in every city in the U.S.
Yep.
And I think ironically, I've always thought this was one of the most beautiful parts of the story. Although again, like you said, the initial catalyst part of this is that they happen to live there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that but when you extrapolate it out creatively, as you and I are doing now, like to me, it's we spent decades, if not our entire country's history, narratively talking about Main Street,
Mm-hmm.
right? And yet Main Street isn't necessarily always indicative anywhere it is
Right.
of like the mass of the entire population, right? And a lot of people who lived in a lot of towns, as we used to say when I was growing up in Chicago back in the 70s and the 80s, the vernacular of the prior generations, which isn't always necessarily good vernacular, was like the other side of the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because literally that was railroad tracks, and that was how cities were built out and how they were divided, so sadly, racially and ethnically. And Main Street usually wasn't on the other side of the tracks.
Yeah.
Right, Main Street was on the good side of the tracks, and so but Slauson literally runs the gamut.
Mm-hmm.
It runs through the heart of the community, and there are streets like that, whether it's Milwaukee Avenue in Chicago or something else in Houston or something else in somewhere else in Seattle. There's probably a street, right? So that's just hugely important
Mm-hmm.
to the work that you do, as well as just beautifully representative. It's just really cool.
Yeah. And the ANCO of Slauson Co refers to what we call the company that we keep. So it's the people that are along for the ride, that are aligned in mission and values, anyone from our LPs to our extended network to partners that we work with. And just, we can't do this work alone. We're a mighty nimble team of 9 right now. And so it does require to have this ambitious of a goal. And to now be on our second fund, it takes a village. And I think we have a very special one that really rallies around to support our founders, to support this mission. And it's been really, I started on the ANCO side as a partner of Slauson Co and a huge fan from
you were the company that kept. Yeah, you were the company that they were keeping. That's awesome.
And so it's been my journey to get to this firm has been, I'm in the best place that I could ever imagine being, with the best people that I adore working with, working on something that is probably some of the most meaningful work of my life. And to have found that place after doing what I thought was exactly that at my previous company.
I was going to say.
To have found it again, like lightning doesn't strike twice. But for some people, it does.
It has. No, it has. That's why there are averages, because it doesn't strike anybody sometimes. But then some people it strikes more than once. But you set such a high bar in the era that you had prior to this, that to see, and just as a friend and as someone who watches online and just sees your life unfold, I can see the joy, the deep joyfulness and contentment with what you're doing. And again, you are already that joyful person. So that says a lot about the organization. It's really cool. Okay, quick, I want to dig into a little bit more about how, like, what you do and how you do it inside of it. And then we're going to talk about some of the portfolio companies. It will make you pick like your favorite children. But before we do that, you teased there at the end, and we just raised our second fund. Mm-hmm. So we've teased it twice now. So why don't you go ahead and tell us what happened yesterday and how big it was and all that, what you're going to do with it.
Yeah. So yesterday we announced our Fund 2, which is our second fund. It's a $100 million fund. When I came on board, we were still investing out of our first fund, which is a $75 million fund that they raised in 2020 to early 2021, and invested in, I believe, about 37 companies out of Fund 1. And then when I came on board a little bit over a year ago, kind of kickstarted the process of thinking about, Fund 2, and that the life cycle of venture capital firms kind of really lives and dies by, each fund that they raise. And raising the first one kind of catalyzed the summer of 2020, post the murder of George Floyd and the, racial and social reckoning that occurred that summer, to really be a launch pad for what Slauson is doing now. And so, could they do it again? And I think we saw statistically that it was much harder in the last year or so for fund managers to raise a second fund just because of the economy, and LPs were pulling out their capital from venture because they just weren't seeing the returns that they wanted. It was too volatile, wanted to put it into something else. So I think that it's really a testament to, the vision of Austin and AJ, to the ability to execute as they have, to say that we did the things that we set out to do in Fund 1, and we're going to keep doing them in a much bigger way for Fund 2. And I run the accelerator at Slauson Co called Friends and Family. And my the 20 companies that we invested in earlier this year were actually the first investments out of Fund 2. So that was really exciting to know that, I'm helping to kick off kind of this next, the 2.0 for Slauson.
Yeah, I was going to say, you kind of got him. You had him in the womb, so to speak, before we brought him out in the public. That's awesome. Talk about that. Talk about your day-to-day work. So, head of programs, running the accelerator. What's the day-to-day for Miki inside of Slauson look like?
Yeah. I think probably a lot of people say this, like, day is different depending on what we're doing. But for me, I'm primarily focused on developing programs that advance the mission of economic inclusion forward. Primary focus is the accelerator. So we just wrapped the kind of first iteration of this new investment model that we had, but it was actually the third cohort. So when I was at Grid, we launched Friends and Family with Slauson Co about 2 years ago. It was a grant-based program. So 12 weeks virtual program, selected 20 companies. They each received $25,000 as a grant. But Slauson made a strategic decision about almost 2 years ago to bring that program in-house, to turn it into an investment-based vehicle. It would just make a lot more sense, being able to be part of the core fund versus trying to raise non-dilutive capital from philanthropic sources.
Sure.
And brought me on board to really rethink, okay, what does a world-class accelerator, with the name Slauson, look like? And what should the terms be? How much should we invest? And so we launched about a year ago. We announced the new version of Friends and Family that was investing $150,000 as an investment into 20 companies across the country. We picked those companies. We ran the program for 12 weeks. We finished up at the end of May. And since then, I've been still working with probably about 10 companies that are now prepping to fundraise, kicked off their fundraise, and just, trying to do whatever they can to move to that next level for their businesses. Awesome. So for me, like, my day-to-day just depends on where we're at and kind of the life cycle of these programs. It could be hosting, I could do a weekly kind of call with these founders and just kind of doing status checks and accountability and what support do they need, making warm intros for them, giving them feedback on how things are going, just helping them kind of strategize on fundraising timelines and things like that. I'm also simultaneously, we're getting ready to announce the next cohort or the next program and applications for it for Friends and Family, with some actually really meaningfully exciting changes. So some of the things that we noticed in this past program, we had 20 companies, which I typically ran cohorts of 20 companies, and you give more people more opportunities. Some will accelerate a little bit faster than others, but just really crucial resources, capital for each of those. I think what we found was really wanting to figure out how can we extend, runway for companies. It's taking them much longer to raise. It's taking them much longer if they're pre-product to get to a point of having built a product.
Adapting to the changing market.
Exactly. Yeah. So how can we just give the founders a little bit more of a lifeline? And so what does that change for our programs? What does that change for the format of the program, for the format of the investment? So we're actually increasing the size of the investment for the next go around, and we're actually doubling it. So we're going from 150 to 300K, and kind of extending the program timeline a little bit, just to allow for more hands-on support, more time for company building, and just being there from an accountability perspective to ensure that the founders have everything that they need, are able to build a a viable and strong business that should they go out to raise capital, they'll be better positioned to be able to do that. And so
that's incredible.
More capital, more time. The hypothesis is that they will be better positioned.
It's huge. It can't hurt. I mean, like just in hyper simple analysis, right? It literally cannot hurt. And it's one of the things as I traveled Latin America over the prior 10 years and worked in helping develop ecosystems down there. The great weakness I always saw in that incubator accelerator model was that it was so truncated, right? And that the calendaring and the amounts of investments or grants were really kind of not designed with the founder's practicality in mind, but were really designed with the stakeholders' accountability in mind, right? So if it was the accelerators and incubators were like, well, we have to put butts in seats, and we have to because we have to show the people that are our benefactors organizationally that we're doing this. And then it was kind of like, well, whatever happens after that, well, that's just, founders. It's tough being a founder. Good luck, right? And so that's a very thoughtful, both realization and then actualization, a true pragmatic step towards how you can do what everybody does, but how you guys can do it a little bit differently and a little bit more smartly. Kudos to you. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, there's the companies are still our investments, and we still
you want them to succeed.
Yeah, we want them to succeed. We're also, just from like a numbers perspective, like this is what we do is we look for returns. So we look for opportunities that could generate a return. Yeah. And so what are the resources? What is the support? What is the capital that, again, best positions companies to be able to do that and to be successful?
But it's such an obvious statement. And you're saying it almost with a little bit of like come on, Rob, we know this, like this makes sense. Right. But yet you and I both know that industry wide, right, that it is an obvious statement that has very rarely, if ever, been applied. Right. Because the metric was always just, well, this is how it's done. Yeah. If they can't succeed in our time frame, then that's on them and not on us. And I've always been the one inside of the us and the them going, that you're literally you're cutting off your nose to spite your face of the portfolio company. So you guys are, again, adjusting to a changed market set of market conditions to say, hey, founders, we get it. It takes longer. You need more runway. You need more support. We're going to get really good at doing that for you.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
And I think that how that's been done, it's also done very similarly in venture firms too, in terms of, there's a formula, like when we put together this, $100 million fund, X amount will go to new investments, X amount will go to follow on. There is an expectation that only a couple of those companies will be like the real winners. And that some of those, a majority of them will be written down to zero and they will fail. And then some, might return their fund or the amount of money. And so it's kind of like a, no loss there, but it's like a mathematical equation, from like a finance perspective of who we're betting on that only a couple of these companies will really be successful in terms of a 30x multiple, for example, versus saying, all of these companies are going to. That's just like the reality of the situation.
Sure.
So there still has to be somewhat like an assessment of who we think is going to kind of be, the breakaway, company, and maybe throw a little bit more resources at them. But at the beginning, giving more opportunities to these companies at the earliest stages.
Giving everybody that you choose in that cohort pool just a slightly better chance.
Yeah.
We're just giving you, again, we're just creating a bit more runway, a bit more time, because those are the two variables that jump off the charts in the analysis that tell us that if you can affect those variables, you affect people's potential likelihood of success. That it might be from 2 to 7%, but it's still we're going to, right? Yeah. But then for some, they're going to be the natural stars that are going to emerge anyways. That's awesome. Kudos. Again, that's really cool. Subtext to all the excitement of the announcement, the headline announcements yesterday. This is the real how to work. Okay, it's the next day. Yesterday was the cool video. There's no movie today. We're just gonna get back to work.
That's the work continues.
That is awesome. Okay, so if you could, let's use examples. And I'm not going to force you to pick your favorite children from amongst all the incredible founders and companies you work with, but if you could give us one or two. Or two or three, whatever you want, kind of concise, great examples of the sorts of businesses that are being supported by you guys. And maybe the purpose of sharing these examples for now is kind of how those businesses kind of embody, what's possible from inside, at least in this case, like from inside our local economy or from the broader economy that you guys invest in.
Yeah, I'll give a couple examples, one from our core fund, and then one maybe from the accelerator. So on the core fund side, I mean, you and I have had conversations around this, that venture capital is not meant for all companies, but then what are the options that are available for those companies? Yeah. So we have a portfolio company called Bags that started out as a loan discovery platform for CPG businesses and brands. And so recognizing that there was a heyday when direct-to-consumer brands could raise venture capital. They still kind of do, but most of the industry is a little bit like leery on investing in CPG, just because it's a heavily capital-intensive businesses. You're spending money on inventory, marketing, getting into retail. The margins aren't great, et cetera, et cetera. But there are other types of financing and capital. So whether you've got an invoice from a retailer, a PO, you have got inventory that you're selling direct to consumer that has value. Those are assets. You can get capital for that. And so Bags really started off as, we see all of these businesses that are thinking they're trying to get venture capital, but they're not meant for them. But so how can we connect them better? And then they've kind of evolved a little bit. So now they have a cash flow management tool. They're helping with finance and accounting, kind of fractional CFO, and just helping, companies understand their numbers so that they can be better positioned to get these lines of capital, and connecting them that way. And so it's something that I get really excited about, kind of alternate capital financing for these businesses that make more sense, that, debt is not a scary thing when it comes to building a business. It is a cheaper type of capital in comparison to venture capital, where you're giving a percentage of your company that, you lose ownership in that, versus taking on a loan or something that, just helps you cover when retailers aren't paying you for 60, 90, 120 days. So it can help you with cash flow, and it's just good business management. And so I really love what they're doing and how much they care about these small businesses and brands and wanting to see them be successful and finding actual opportunity in that and seeing growth in that. Another example is a company that we supported through our accelerator. It's called RX Post. And it's actually an LA-based company. The founder was a pharmacy tech for 20 years. And she realized, like, working for independent pharmacy chains, if you have expiring drugs, if you have an excess of inventory in drugs, there is no way for you lose money if those go bad. It could be that, if you've got a prescription, a life-saving prescription at this one pharmacy and they don't have it, you're losing time trying to get that prescription. So she's developed this kind of inventory management driven marketplace where independent pharmacies can buy and sell prescriptions, to each other. And it's really just helping them facilitate that transaction, those interactions. Makes it much easier than like trying to call around and being like, hey, do you have this? And then is this ethical? And because it's all done, through the platform. But there's even just like kind of a level deeper. It's understanding and even like predicting when you might run out of something or have too much of something, and be able to kind of flag that to someone's attention, to alert somebody who you see is running low that, hey, smart technology is telling you that this pharmacy over here has what you need.
That's really cool.
And so the fact that she has this tremendous lived experience in this space, she has worked in pharmacies for years. She knows how to sell to them. And we laughed because she has a fax marketing campaign because pharmacies still use faxes. And so
that's awesome. That's both awesome and sad all at the same time.
She knows that the best way to get to them is door to door. So actually showing up and like talking to the pharmacies there. And because she understands the language and she has like reputation, she's on different like councils and organizations for pharmacists. So she's got credibility when it comes to trying to sell her product and her platform. And then she understands just the nuances of how it works versus, and somebody who maybe stumbled across this as an idea and is trying to build it doesn't have the lived experience that she does.
No, right. Of course not. No, I mean, she's a literal expert.
Yeah.
But then adds that layer of like the specific understanding of the culture too, right? So she knows like, this is how you sell. This is that. Yeah, I just literally wrote her down because I want her to be on this podcast at some
She's
point.
amazing.
That's
Yeah.
like she's literally an entrepreneurial thinker in the world of pharmacy stuff that
Oh yeah.
neither of us ever would have thought
Yes.
about. Right? That's incredible. Those are incredible stories. I mean, that's the diversity of possibility, right? That's the range. That's really cool. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing those.
Yeah.
I have a couple of bigger picture questions as we get towards the latter part here. Um, uh, One is just it's been in the news a lot lately, right? And so as I saw the stories in the news, I was like, man, I want to know what Miki thinks of this. Rather than just texting you and say, what do you think of this? I was like, hey, let's talk about it on the podcast. Right. So a lot of in the business world lately, right? A lot of funds, a lot of obviously political leaders, et cetera, corporations in the traditional business world are pulling back, kind of like retreating from this whole concept of DEI, right? And sadly, then some are, of course, in our political environment that we're in, like then taking it and using it as a weapon and weaponizing the whole concept behind it. Talk to me about how or if these pullbacks, right, this support, this commitment, how or if at all this affects your work at Slauson, and then maybe more broadly, just the kind of your own personal opinion on, are these pullbacks meaningful? Are they slowing our cultural progress that we need? What do you think?
Yeah. It's so interesting that it's suddenly become this divisive
Yeah.
word or phrase or three letters.
Right.
Um, and that it's like, when my Twitter feed has gotten real interesting lately, and I'm just like seeing things that I don't know that I should be seeing because this is not for me. But it's good because I think that was the bubble that we all lived in kind of pre the 2016 election where we're like, there's no way that this guy is going to get elected. And then we were in for a rude
Yeah.
awakening because we didn't have diverse perspectives. Like we had kind
Right.
of the perspectives that we thought and that people around us shared that we thought were right and correct and would win. And I think that's the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think I want to live in a world that is diverse and equitable and inclusive
Right.
because there is power in different perspectives and understand like respect for those differences. And I think it makes people stronger and there's innovation. That's where the innovation comes from is people
Yeah.
thinking differently. And so even if I don't agree with you, I'd love to understand like why you think this way, but it just helps me like that. Not all people think this one singular way.
And to your point earlier, unrelated, but like this is a more diverse country or city or wherever you live, right? Is where we're heading inevitably,
Mhm.
anyways. And we like we have been, right? So it's like I'll make a maybe a weak analogy here, but like it's like we talk about remote work, right? And oftentimes, too oftentimes, we talk about it in the context of like as if it was just something that just popped out of the
Mhm.
pandemic and it had never been thought of before. When literally like 2019, right before the pandemic, like already like 19 to 21% of the world's workforce, like white collar workforce, was working remotely. Like remote work had been a thing for decades, like
Yeah.
slowly building up, like since the 80s or 90s, right? And to me, like we are just diversifying as a country and slowly institutionally or corporately, culturally, like we are becoming more equitable or more aware of our inequities, right? And we're trying to become more inclusive and more aware of our lack of inclusivity. And so, but we now it seems like people or organizations this retreat. I'm worried about this retreat. Like, is the retreat just maybe as performative as the move forward was? And the truth is, the companies are diversifying themselves anyways, and their management ranks are becoming more diverse, and their executive ranks and their investment decisions were progressively becoming more diverse, just because of what the market is. And so it wasn't necessarily as valuable when they announced it, and it's therefore not as damaging when they retreat it because the truth is they're doing it anyways. Or is this a meaningful like pushback to like we're in this like great battle between good and evil? Like
Mhm.
where are we at in your opinion?
Um, it's a good question. It's hard to say because I think, like you said, this is happening. This shift is happening. We are, 2040, the minority will become the majority. And
You're
so,
not like, we're not going to stop that
yeah.
from happening, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a segment of
that
the
would love
country
to.
that would love to, but it's
Yeah.
not happening, and it's not because of illegal immigration or XYZ reasons.
Nope.
It's just,
Nope.
it's bigger than that. And
Nope.
that's what makes this country amazing is that like just diverse representation of multiple parts and different parts and not just one thing. And so I don't know. I think it's they can do the proverbial they can do and say
Right.
whatever of trying to pull back, of canceling programs, of putting things into law. But again, who is that then benefiting? Because
Yeah.
if the if this is the representation of our country, we should be doing things that best support what this country is. It not like looking like what is. Um,
Yeah.
and and I don't know if it's just not calling something like a DEI initiative. It's like just calling it an initiative because this is
Right.
what matters. Like a lot of people think that Slauson is an impact firm. And we don't
Right.
actually
Yeah. Talk
categorize
about that.
ourselves as an impact firm. Like, yes, there will be, impact will be created by the work that we're
But
doing,
that's
but
because that's the
yeah,
business we've decided to
but
run.
it's
Like
financial
yeah.
impact, it's community
Right.
impact, it's economic impact, it's impact in a lot of different things. We are still at the end of the day a financial firm that is looking to create returns for our investors, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it in a way that just like is better for humanity, and that can
Yeah.
be a mission driven focused around it. We this is not charity, it's not philanthropic. We are looking at real like economic opportunities that we are hugely massively excited about, that we think can do incredible things for the spaces that they're building in, and then as a kind of a ripple effect, we'll be able to create opportunities for more people. So
Yeah. No, you're literally, it's like those. We should get you some of those signs that they had at the Harris Walls campaign event yesterday with the opportunity economy on the blue sign. I was like, I love that. That's great marketing.
yeah.
Um, I could literally, we could talk for days because I love you. I think you're just a big brain, and I always enjoy your thoughtfulness. But I don't want to do that because you have to go change the world today. So I've got a couple more questions, then we'll get to our finish and wrap things up. So first question, we started today kind of talking about the state of things in 2024. So we were doing a little bit of a state of the union on the entrepreneurial economy in Los Angeles and more broadly. You've been here a long time. You've got such a unique, as you would say, lived experience. You, ironically, like with Grid 110 and the pandemic, and now what you're doing here, you were heading in this direction of like finding the Slauson avenues in other cities, anyways, like before you got to Slauson, because I remember we even talked about that in our
Mm-hmm.
last visit. But so, if you could look into your crystal ball for me now, and I'm not going to hold you to all this, right? You're not responsible for the future of the world, but I would love to know, what do you see? Let's just bring it back home here for a bit. What do you see kind of as our local regional entrepreneurial economy looking and feeling like in 2034? So 10 more years when you and I have another podcast that we're going to do in 10 years. And it'll be the 20th anniversary of our first, but like we'll do that. Yeah.
Oh man, that's so hard. I'm
What are we going to look and feel like here?
yeah.
Like, is it still just, we're still just all going to be going to events at the Fairmont on Wilshire Boulevard in Santa Monica, or
A long time ago I stopped making like 5 or 10 year plans because you just never know what's going to
yeah.
happen in the world and what opportunities are going to show up for
This one you
themselves.
don't have to be responsible
No,
for
no,
it. You
I
get to
know.
just purely speculate with me.
But what I think it's interesting because 5 years ago, never would have thought what has happened and transpired in the world would have happened, right? So I think it's this.
Slauson didn't exist
Well, yeah, no, Slauson
five
didn't
years, right? 5 years
exist.
ago. There
We had,
was not $175 million under
yeah,
management, right?
well, a lot of things, like pandemic and like COVID and masking and a lot of things, like just a lot has happened in 5 years. So when you think about like 10 years of not necessarily like bad things that could happen, but just like things that will shift, kind of what we're doing, what we care about in LA, what the kind of larger country looks like, what the Olympics will do.
Yeah.
So I guess what I get excited about is still hearing that more people are kind of moving to LA or excited about LA as an ecosystem. I think we're somewhere in the we're top 5 globally. I think we're 3 or 4. And I think we really have we'll stay there, I would
Yeah,
imagine. I think because we have the talent from the schools, I think because we have the capital that's here. I'll be curious to see as LA evolves into a more mature ecosystem, what that starts to look like. And founders not having to go to San Francisco to raise kind of Series A and beyond, and actually having those larger kind of growth stage funds here and investing
yeah,
here. So the Slausons of the world, maybe we'll have a growth stage fund at some time and investing a little bit later down. I
sure,
know we love pre-seed and seed and we love the early stage. But there will be, a need in Los Angeles for later stage capital, and would love
absolutely.
for the city to benefit from that versus, the returns and the exits benefiting Silicon Valley, San Francisco, et
Right.
cetera.
And there's always been in certain sectors, right? There's always
Yeah.
been that. It's just been like there are some consistent firms who that's what the space they played in for the entire time they've been in Los Angeles, 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
But to your point earlier, right? It's just to have more firms serving more audiences and more niches or sectors.
Yeah.
That'll be great.
My hope, kind of the vision that we set out with Grid, was, as a nonprofit, was that anybody who wanted to become an entrepreneur, had the ambitions to become an entrepreneur, could do so, given the right tools, education, community resources, et cetera. So how can we scale that? We worked with small cohorts at a time, requiring kind of one to few in terms of attention. But is there a way that can be scalable? Is there a way that anybody in the city of Los Angeles, you have an idea for a business, you can go take a, jumpstart program to get you just well-versed in what are the steps I need to take? Because so many people have done it already before and they've made lots of mistakes along the way. And they, now knowing what they've been through, you talk to any founder who's been in it for a couple of years, they have 5 things that they would do differently if they were to do it again. And so how do we kind of open source? There's lots of books and podcasts and things like that, but I think oftentimes people need that more, focused attention. They want to be in community with other people to really just connect and commiserate and celebrate kind of the journey. And so my hope is that there are more opportunities for founders like that, and that people that have really creative ideas, whatever the type of business that they want to build, whether it's selling something out of their house or having a brick and mortar location, that the pathway to doing so gets easier,
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit more formulaic and more support for that.
That's a pragmatic but optimistic view. I love that. That's I'm right with you. I think we'll have, in the super summary way, I'll say I think we'll have more, a lot more, frankly, of what we're really good at, and more people playing in those spaces of what we're really good at, and then I think we will have added to that more net new things that we will become good at. Humbly, and I'm going to talk about this later on another show tomorrow. But humbly, I think I have this thesis. We've been in this intermission. We've been in this kind of literally transitional period of roughly 5 years, and I framed it up in such a way that it's kind of like my life is the window, kind of. So it's we had a world that was essentially kind of post World War II to about 2020 and the pandemic, and then instead of just this we had a pandemic and then what's going on in 2021, are we back to normal yet? I've always believed it in the middle of 2020, and I believed it since then when we visited last, that really it was probably going to take us to shake it all out and reemerge into the post intermission second act of the play, till 2025. And we were going to have this 5-year kind of window that was going to throw everything up for discussion and debate, and Los Angeles, which we both love, as our home city, is just one of those things, right? So we're gonna figure out the things we're not very good at. We're gonna get better at them. We're gonna keep working on the problems. We're gonna keep trying to improve society and fix the things that we societally spent the last 40 or 50 years screwing up.
Yeah.
And we're gonna go back and retreat and do better. But then we're also running up against this grouping of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and like that is literally a whole different generational perspective that are coming in behind you, millennials and me, Gen Xers, and they're going to be like, hey, we got a whole different view of how think when we see a better world, we got a different view of what that means, and maybe what you all did, and that those they're going to start to be in positions of leadership, right? And that's a great thing. So. Yeah. All right. So I have one question to ask, and we're going to change things up a little bit at the end and do something slightly differently because it's just you. And I really want to know this. So this is completely selfishly. Last question. What's the most important stuff to you right now in your life? Like, what are the 2 or 3 biggest priorities for you going forward?
Yeah. I'll say personally, myself, just prioritizing myself, my health, mental wellness. I think it definitely took a toll running an organization through the pandemic. And I feel like I'm still recovering from that a little bit.
Yeah,
And
I would
it's,
imagine.
it's one of the things that I appreciate so much about the Slauson team is being able, as an individual contributor, not being a founder anymore, not being kind of like the person in charge. I really just love not having to be responsible for making those types of decisions, but I feel incredibly supported by the team that we have. And it's, the collaboration and camaraderie, and just I enjoy going into the office and showing up every day. And everybody, I think, probably would say the same. Is we're all there for the same reason, and we each bring unique gifts and talents to the jobs that we're doing, and none of this work could be done without all of us together. But there's definitely, I have been guilty of wrapping up my identity into what I do professionally, and it's very all consuming for me. And for a period of time, I was like, it didn't really matter. I was okay with it because I enjoyed it so
Right.
much. But then you kind
Right.
of hit, points of burnout or needing to set just your own boundaries of, I don't have time for myself. I'm not doing things that are necessarily fulfilling me outside of work. What does that look like? And I remember, I think the last time we spoke, I talked about attempting hobby hopping, which was something that
Yep.
our friend Ezene had mentioned to me of something she was
Yep.
trying out new things. And like, I wanted to get back to that. So I've actually started playing like paddle tennis with a friend. It's kind of like pickleball.
You literally you played yesterday.
I did.
Yeah.
And
Okay, that's I was wondering, is like being a paddle, or I think technically they call it padel.
padel, yeah.
Is being a padel champion like in your future now?
I think I'm just having fun with it. Like it's been a while since I've found like
Good
a
for you.
physical activity that I enjoyed so
Yes.
much. And even if I'm terrible at it, I've like missed a bunch of shots, and it,
You just described every male golfer in the history of golf, like literally.
but it's like,
Good for
even
you.
it's like a very surreal feeling because there's courts in Venice. I think they actually just opened this like really fancy court in Century City at the Century City Mall that's like on the top
Okay.
floor that I really want to check out now. But it's
Nice.
like these like small, like they're smaller than regular sized tennis courts, probably more like pickleball courts.
That's what I've heard.
They're
Just
free.
don't ever. Apparently,
Yeah,
what
no,
our investor friend Magdalena Cala has reminded us constantly is don't ever compare padel
nope.
and pickleball.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got a little taste of that. Of like, there's signs that say no pickleball allowed until like these 2 hour time frames. And there's like, I got like the insider. It was really interesting just to get kind
That's
of like
funny.
the cultural perspectives of it. But it was like the courts are free. You just have to wait for a court to free up. I don't have a racket, so I rented one from a guy for $5.
There you go. Nice.
And we're playing at sunset on the beach in Los Angeles, and
Life could be worse,
just having a ball. And so I
right?
think it reminded me of like more moments of joy through
Yeah.
simple things like that, whether it's spending time with friends,
Good for you.
walking my dogs, trying new hobbies and things. I think I just found myself kind of in this headspace where I'm like, I don't feel like myself, but maybe it's because I'm still like discovering who I am now as
Yeah.
a now 44-year-old woman. And
Right.
like, what does life look like for me as I'm like moving
Good for you.
forward, and just enjoying, I think, the discovery process of that.
That's awesome. Maybe a few more 49ers or Warriors
Yeah.
games, right? Like no, but that's awesome, and that's And honestly, that's the best answer you could have given to that question for me, selfishly, as your friend, right? Because like I know you're always got 7 things in the back of your head about how you can change the world and
Yeah.
how you can make the world better and how you can. But to hear you just authentically, honestly say, yeah, like you know what my priority is? It's me,
Yeah.
and just rebuilding a healthy, as you say, a healthy, smart, talented, beautiful 44-year-old woman
Yeah.
who wants to just live life in this world. Good for you.
Thanks.
That's awesome. Thank you. This has been an absolute, not surprised at all. This has been an absolute pleasure.
I appreciate you so much, Rob.
No, this is great. How can folks find Slauson, connect, apply to programs, find you on social? How do we find you?
Yeah, so we're Slauson Co on all socials, and then slauson.co is our website. I'm at Mixter on all socials. We've got really great content across YouTube, Instagram, playing a little bit with
Literally,
TikTok.
you're like a small Hollywood studio at this point. It's awesome.
Yeah, shout out to our content team, Brandon and Clarissa. They do a phenomenal
job.
Go,
Brandon and Clarissa. That was amazing work. And by the way, they'll probably love this episode when they can take it and slice it and dice it and do all the cool things to make you look good. But that's awesome. And that's great. People apply. People, if you feel like you're in this cohort and this community, go find Slauson. If you're not sure if you are, go find Slauson. If you're adjacent to it and you're curious and you want to learn, watch for all the Slauson events that they host, both here in Los Angeles and then online. They talk about events that they produce around the country. I know they were big in Atlanta last year, like just different places around the country. So if they're coming to your town, this is the company you want to keep.
Yes.
Right. These are the people you want to be around. So awesome. I love you. Thank you so much. Happy whatever day today is.
First day of NFL football.
No, you're excited. Okay, there we go. I set you up with that one. All right. This is awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. We can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.